Thank you, Manisha. And I keep seeing you guys, but it's great fun. And I'm really delighted to be doing this. We've saved the best for the last. This is the last main stage event. And to do the main stage event with us is, of course, Ajay Banga, President of the World Bank. He actually needs little introduction to this community because before he became President of the World Bank, he was CEO of MasterCard and advancing technology and innovation on many fronts, and many of us know him, have dealt with him. It has been a great regret of the Singapore FinTech Festival, which has attracted so many luminaries over the past 8 years, that we never managed to get Ajay Banga for the Singapore FinTech Festival. And so now, finally, we've done it. He's here in a different capacity, in a more impactful capacity, and I think that's very great for us that he's joined us.
Thank you, thank you.
I said I won't introduce him. He knows, you all know him. One less well-known fact is that Ajay's been a very good friend of Singapore. In fact, the Singapore government has bestowed on him one of our highest awards, the Distinguished Friends of Singapore Public Service Star. No doubt.
Thank you.
He is distinguished, no question about it. And he's been a friend of Singapore. Many of us have dealt with him, known him, and have become his friends. And he has helped many of us through his many dialogues, except at the Singapore FinTech Festival. And now he's doing public service on a global scale. So it can't get better than that. So to get started, Ajay, you were appointed in June of this year. And I don't say this to flatter you. I speak to many people in the climate and sustainability field. And every one of them says, with the new leadership at the World Bank, things look more promising. We can do this. We can move on this front. And it's, I think, I know it adds a lot of pressure, and I'm sure there is, but I think it speaks a lot to Ajay's vision for a better world, a more sustainable world, a more inclusive world, and he has spoken about this. And so I'm going to start off at the broad level before he talks about the bank. He just came back from Marrakesh, the World Bank IMF meetings last month. Can you give us a sense, Ajay, about where you see the global issues and developments heading, and what are your key takeaways from Marrakesh?
Yes, first of all, Ravi, thank you for that very generous introduction. I will say that I consider Singapore to be a second home for me and my family. And the reason for that is not just the fact that it is a very easy place to live in and be in, but it's also the people and the vision and the manner in which the government of Singapore engages with people like us. And I think that's a compliment to all of you. The FinTech Festival is an exhibition of that, and that's a compliment to you and your team. So thank you for everything you do, Ravi. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
The Marrakesh was my first annual meeting. I've currently been in the bank just a little under 6 months. I joined in June. And I will say that one of the first things from a global perspective is that the global economy actually, on the totality, has held up better than almost anybody thought it would. So if you go back over the last 2 years, often the commentary was the global economy is going to hit a wall because of this. It's going to hit a wall because of that. Quantitative easing is moving to quantitative tightening. Interest rates are going to rise in a way that they haven't done for decades. There's always been a reason why the economy should hit a wall. And the reality is that the global economy has held up relatively well. Part of that is countries like the US have done better than people thought. But part of it is also that hides the fact that inside the global economy, there are many countries that are suffering quite deeply. And they're suffering for various reasons, but one of those has to do with the debt load that they took on in the years of low interest rates. As interest rates went up and the dollar strengthened, there's like a double whammy for those countries. And I think that needs to be really carefully dealt with. Otherwise, we run the risk of creating a real challenge of disparities even further in the years to come. The second little piece is that what got proven clearly was that the challenges of poverty and fighting poverty and shared prosperity, inequality, essentially, cannot be dealt with in isolation from pandemics and climate change and fragility and conflict and soil degradation. So if you look at the world's growth and prosperity in fighting poverty over the prior 3 decades, 3 years of being impacted by COVID set that back in many countries. And bad rainfall is setting that back in Kenya today. So I think realizing that these challenges are intertwined and interconnected in almost like a perfect storm is kind of a really important part of what we were discussing in Marrakesh. And that led to the thinking that we've got to widen the bank's aperture by which we look at a problem to go beyond poverty and shared prosperity to also including these multifarious challenges of climate change and pandemics and the like. The third thing that we talked about in Marrakesh, which is relevant to this audience, is that we cannot do that without focusing on women and young people. And you guys are on a FinTech festival. One of the best things that FinTech does is it democratizes access. When you democratize access, you enable those who didn't have access to get access at an affordable price in a way that enables the spread of these tools and enables access to the financial system and all the good things that that implies. The fact is that women even today, even in the developed world, let alone in the developing world, do not have access to the same benefits, the same opportunities in their life, right from the time they're born to the time much later in lives. And we have to change that because half the population of the world cannot be less productive for the world to prosper. We just cannot be in a situation where the benefits of prosperity and growth do not go to half the population of the world. So focusing on women and changing their opportunities, and secondly on young people, because the global south is blessed with young people, and that is a demographic dividend if we allow those young people to get access to health and education, clean air and clean water when they're growing up, and once they're grown up, get a job. Because with a job, you get dignity. And if we don't do that, we need 1 billion jobs for these young people coming through the pipe over the coming 15 years. The current trajectory in the world is to generate 350 million jobs. We're going to be 2/3 short. And this is before we discuss what things like AI could do to the change in the way the job markets are constructed. Again, a topic of this festival. So I think those topics in Marrakesh were important. A wider aperture beyond poverty to include livable planet with all that it means, to include women and young people in particular as a focus, not ignoring others, but in particular for the right reasons as a focus, and the idea of making jobs a critical element of dignity and growth.
Thank you, Ajay. That was a really succinct and yet all-encompassing overview of the kinds of issues we're facing today, from global macroeconomic conditions to indebtedness to the challenges of underdevelopment and poverty and how they interplay with climate change and pandemics, both of which are potentially existential risks. And ending on a note of hope that technology and the strength and the demographics of the global south are things that we can work in our favor.
Correct.
If we can bring people together, put our heads together on solutions. So talking about solutions, you've sketched the broad landscape. How do you describe the World Bank Group's response to this? What is the new agenda that is evolving, I'm sure? Can you give us a sense of where it's heading?
And so the idea of eradicating poverty on a livable planet is where we are going with this focus on women and children. Now, the way, how do you get from here to there? I think the first thing we have to do and recognize is that the bank cannot do this, or other banks put together. Multilateral development banks do not, no matter how generous donor governments may be, and Singapore is a generous contributor to the multilateral system, your generosity and the generosity of countries like yours cannot be enough to find a way to the trillions of dollars that are being bandied about for solving even the most single siloed vertical of renewable energy in the emerging markets alone. Just that one. Forget about everything else. And so I think that we need to get the private sector involved. We need to find ways to get their capital, their ingenuity, their people, their technology, their innovation to the table. I know you understand that, but that's a topic that needs real focus, because it's not as though just saying that we want them involved means that they're going to break down the doors in countries to invest in these things. We need to understand what holds them back and then discuss that. And we can talk about that when we get to it. The second big thing is to make the bank become much more efficient in the way it works. The bank has amazing people. I was telling you this earlier. It has people who are subject matter experts. It has people who have worked in the most difficult circumstances to deliver development with their families living with them. These are people who you want to be on your side when you're fighting a war on development. The challenge is, how do you liberate them from the processes that very often overtake the substance of organizations to enable them to do what they're best capable of doing, which is to focus their energy on getting things done. And I think that's making the bank a better bank is what I mean by that. Both efficient inside, but also in its partnerships with other multilateral banks and with the private sector. So to give you an example, I'll give you two examples, one on efficiency, one on partnerships. It takes us 27 months on the average to go from beginning the discussion of a project to the time the first dollar goes out the door. 27 months is a lifetime. We need to find a way to bring that down. Our first target, bring it down by a third in the next year to 2 years, and then bring it down by another third in the year after that. So we can start looking at this being more like a 12 to 14 months as compared to a 27 months. That's just one example. Now, there are many reasons why it takes 27 months. Don't get me wrong. This is not because people are sitting with their hands under their, butt. It's because there are challenges in getting this done that need tangible, practical solutions. A second example of partnership is the first thing I did with the Inter-American Development Bank is I traveled with their president into Latin America, which is their focus area. And it had never happened. Nobody from the World Bank and the IDB had actually traveled together, no presidents. We went together, we went to two countries, and over the back of an envelope, we decided we would collaborate on three things in particular. That doesn't mean he's not doing another 10 and I'm not doing another 5, but three things. Raising money for the Amazon and raising basically Amazonia bonds, which we are good at doing and we can lend our expertise to them. 2, finding ways to combat the catastrophic impact of hurricanes and the like in the Caribbean. And 3, how to use digital technology, you love this, to overcome the learning gap that some parts of Latin America faced during COVID, particularly for girls. But then eventually, how to use digital technology to improve governance in Latin America. Again, something that GovTech and Singapore understands very well. So the idea of taking those three is to create a force multiplier. And it's not just an MOU. We have very specific projects. Every 6 months, he and I will review them and decide how we are doing. And if we don't like the color of the traffic light that comes up, people will feel the impact. And that's the kind of thinking that we're trying to do.
Amazing. We've really got the right person for the job coming from the private sector. And this is, something we always speak about whenever we innovate or apply technology or think of a solution. Clarity of problem statement. And Ajay just mentioned the three things that he worked out as clear outcomes around which you can galvanize effort. And this is what we all need. And the point about partnerships, public-private partnerships. So let me get into that a little bit more. You mentioned financing and the amount of, we have enough private capital in the world to solve most of the world's problems. Climate change to inclusion, pandemics. So if you take just climate change or sustainability, there is enough money out there on banks' balance sheets to originate these loans. There is enough institutional investor capital to buy products or investment products based on these loans and projects. And there is great willingness There's great willingness because the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, GFANZ, has brought together financial institutions who have made commitments. The finance sector has moved ahead of most other sectors to make commitments to net zero by 2050. That's the good news. The bad news, financial institutions need to get commercial returns. Many of these projects are just marginally bankable, just below the waterline, where the risk is just a touch too high to justify the returns that they can generate. And you need a higher rate of return. And there's been a lot of discussion on this as to how public capital and private capital can come together. And you've been voicing this very eloquently in many forums. It's not universally accepted, let's be honest, that we use public capital to lower the cost of capital, de-risk to some extent, so that private capital can come in. Now, the concept seems straightforward, but in practice, it seems so difficult to execute. Why do you think that's the case, and what can the World Bank do? Because you have sight of the whole ecosystem. How can you lead this effort?
So let me answer that in two parts. The first part is specific to do with the private sector, and then I want to discuss something that is a little more touchy but is worth focusing on, which is a way to get resources, which is voluntary markets and subsidies. We'll come to that. So let's just talk about the private sector for a minute. What you said is absolutely correct. If you took renewable energy today, the fact is that the cost per unit generated of solar and wind is lower than the cost per unit generated from fossil fuels. But a solar and wind project tends to have higher capex at the beginning and a longer gestation period because of the need for connectivity and distribution systems and that kind of stuff to get built as well. A private sector operator who's willing to come into a country and set up a solar or wind plant needs 2 or 3 things to be clarified. They can deal with operational risk because that's what they're paid for. That's what their capital is meant to generate as return for, and that's what their expertise in management is. They need to be able to deal with management risk. That's what they're paid for. Yep. They need to be able to deal with execution risk. That's what they're paid for. What they don't know how to deal with is regulatory risk and political risk.
Yes.
So if a country lays out a clear roadmap that for the next 10 years, this is what I'm doing with solar and wind, even if you know that politically a new government may be in place 4 or 5 years from then, you at least know that there is the probability that this country is going in that north on renewable energy. That itself is a very big reassurance for an investor, a clear roadmap for renewable energy. The second part that they need is regulatory policy and the commitment to market mechanisms, or at least some form of predictability around things like tariff policy and around things like distribution policy. If you do not know that the utility that you're negotiating with as a manufacturer of solar energy is going to pay you the following revenue per unit, there is no way that any spreadsheet that you make can incorporate a risk-adjusted return that makes sense to an operator. And so the concept of certainty, of predictability, of consistency on policy, public policy, market mechanisms, regulatory policy is kind of important. I think the bank can be a real partner in that space, both in terms of helping governments create those policies, because that's a subject matter expertise that we do possess, and we are doing that in many countries, but also in the form of providing political risk guarantees, like an insurance, which, as you know, we do through one of our vehicles called MIGA, the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, which today provides about $7 billion worth of these and lays them off into the private reinsurance market. There is a great deal of demand for that paper because the private reinsurers see MIGA's generated guarantees as a relatively safe form of guarantees for them to invest in because the World Bank is behind them. Yeah. And so can we expand that and treble it? Can we make this a much bigger, not only for us, but for the other MDBs as well? So our board has recently approved that we will now be the back office of guarantee provision for all the other multilateral banks, an example of us working together, something that we have not done till 2 months ago for the first time. So there's movement happening on a lot of these topics, but I will caution people in that the private sector and getting the money volume to flow into these projects is not going to change overnight. This is going to be patient, hard work, as you know, but there is real opportunity. In most of the larger middle income countries, where the growth of emissions because of prosperity and young people and the future that they see will be so much higher than the decline in emissions use in the developed world that we lose the chance to meet 2050 targets. That bending the curve in those middle income countries is possible. There are investors ready to invest. They need help with regulatory, policy, and protection. There is a second, more thorny issue to do with foreign exchange risk. That's a much harder one. If you're investing in dollars or euros in a country and then getting paid by the utility in local currency, that's an unexposed risk that requires careful management. Most often, these countries don't have a wide or deep enough hedging market to provide a reasonable hedge for that risk. That's a role that I don't yet know how to solve for. There is an agency called TCX that does pretty good work right now, but they do it for frontier currencies, not for the larger middle income countries, which is where we need this to happen. Yeah. So there's work to be done. There is the idea of can you do more with local currency capital markets and use concessional finance and blended finance to help to goose up the returns in a local bond. So you start attracting local capital. I think those are all important things to do, but none of these is short term. A lot of them have long gestation periods and are hard. So that's the private sector topic. Let me talk for a second about subsidies and carbon markets. $1.25 trillion a year, trillion, many more zeros than billions. 1.25 go into subsidies on fuel, agriculture, and fisheries across the world. The harmful environmental impact of those very subsidies adds up to $6 trillion a year. In theory, if we were to fight off those harmful environmental impacts, it would cost the world economy $7.25 trillion a year. Let's forget the 6, let's talk the 125. Not all the 125 is bad. It's very useful. If you're subsidizing the price of cooking gas to a poorer household in a country, you absolutely should do that. Finding a way, whether you call it common prosperity or spreading the peanut butter in a better way, whatever words you want to use, these are good things we must do. But take the example of the EU. It took $60 billion of subsidies that went into incenting farmers to use more fertilizer with all the runoffs and chemical consequences downstream. The same $60 billion is now paid to the same farmers to incent them to use less fertilizer. To me, that is an intelligent use of subsidies. Yep. So repurposing subsidies can be enormously helpful in the fight on climate. It just is a reality. It's an uncomfortable reality. It's choices we make as citizens and governments of how we spend our money, but it's a topic that needs to be thought through in some depth. And I think the carbon market topic is also important. I think the idea of moving resources from the developed world to the developing world to help with renewable energy adaptation, soil degradation, biodiversity, the things that were caused by a carbon-heavy growth cycle in the developed world, they're not going to happen by somehow thinking that you can tax the developed world and send it to the developing world. There is a normal thing called politics and elections. And so the only way this will work is if you create a voluntary carbon market. And they're difficult because in the past it has led to allegations of not completely transparent credits. I understand that. But this is what the World Bank must try and work on in an effort to make it better and more reliable so we can create reliable carbon credits where the pricing will be better and resources will move the right way, not just to governments, but to the communities that are contributing to that carbon credit. So we are a few months away from trying to do something like this in forestry, where we have, in projects we're involved with, we do a jurisdictional audit end to end to ensure that the credit is green and is not reforesting here with deforesting there. And we're going to try and get that into a system where pricing can then improve through the certification of the bank being involved with that credit. Again, that could be an interesting way of moving my Indonesia, where I was recently, is developing 700,000 hectares of mangrove plantations. It will throw off 60 million tons of a carbon sink. They and their communities should benefit from that work. It's a global good.
This is amazing. And I think Ajay has addressed a set of issues I posed in a multifaceted way, which I think gets to the heart of the problems. Financing, public-private partnerships, but what is required of the private sector in terms of risk-taking, and what are the best things that the public sector can do. I think clarity about that itself is so important. It is about political risk, FX risk. We don't have a solution as yet. We're all struggling with that. Technical assistance. And I thought the other important thing that was emerging, and this is a segue into the next question, is the World Bank, although it's called a bank, it's not just about financing. It's also about knowledge, insights, best practices. And Ajay mentioned a few of them. Subsidies is not a binary issue of good or bad. You can design subsidy schemes in a way that maximize their benefits while minimizing the distortionary effects on the climate. And gathering best insights from many places. And just a small thing that we do in Singapore, electricity prices have gone up. Poor income families, do struggle to pay their bills. And the way we've done it is to do what we call U-Save rebates, which are really cash vouchers, which you can use to pay your electricity bills. And it's means tested and only given to the lower income households. It doesn't distort the economy. It doesn't distort price mechanism overall. Because when you do across-the-board subsidy, that's exactly what happens. And Ajay mentioned the figures, the kind of cost it imposes. So getting those fuel subsidies out of the way, but replacing them with something that is more inclusive and targeted can help achieve both goals. So the World Bank, because of its extensive experience, is also a knowledge repository. And you've spoken about it being a knowledge bank. What are some of the things that the World Bank is doing, besides the financing front, good ideas and spreading good ideas across the globe that others can emulate?
So the Knowledge Bank is a very important part of the bank. We are a money bank, but as you know, over a period of time, our share of a country's budget or GDP contribution in development should actually go down if we are doing our job well. You should need less money from us, but you could always use the knowledge. So if you took Singapore, Singapore needs no money. Singapore is a generous contributor to the bank's capabilities. But one of the things we do well together is knowledge sharing. You have some really interesting things you do well, which we can learn from and take elsewhere. Take water. You guys recycle water and reuse every drop of water multiple times. It is a really interesting way in which you have built a unique way of using water in an urban landscape, which is something that we can all benefit from in other parts of the world. So to me, the Knowledge Bank's job is success transfer. What we're trying to do is to construct the Knowledge Bank along 5 verticals. And the first vertical is people, which is education, health, social benefit schemes, things of that nature. Yeah. The second vertical is prosperity. Economic policy, trade policy, jobs, SME credit, financial inclusion, long-term capital markets, the development of local financial institutions, again, things you understand well, is in the prosperity vertical. The third vertical is planet, mitigation, adaptation, soil, water, biodiversity. The fourth vertical is infrastructure, bridges, ports, highways. And the fifth one is digital, starting from transparency of governance all the way to financial inclusion and what all of you here are doing, which is to build apps on highways that allow, digital highways that allow people to get access and break through the incumbency advantage of an incumbent player, the arbitrage they get. So I think those 5 verticals, people, prosperity, planet, infrastructure, digital, which includes data and AI, by the way. And then across the bottom, I want to create a horizontal way of measuring outcomes, not input only, meaning not dollars and projects. Last year, the bank gave out $120 billion of money into the global economy. A large part of it is grants or concessional financing, and then some of it at market rates and with the private sector. But that's not the only thing I want to count. I want to count how many girls went to school because of us. I want to count how many people got a better job because they went to a skilling institute that we financed. I want to count how many carbon taxes, how many carbon tons of emissions we avoided. Those are the kind of outcome-related measures that I want the horizontal to measure. Yeah. And so if I can get the knowledge bank to do this and do it like we do with every country, we do a 3-year country partnership framework, like a strategic plan. If we can get the knowledge bank to be a part of that and really define with focus the 3 or 5 areas that we will invest in that country in the coming 3 years, and then get our knowledge bank people to help with creating bankable projects, but then in implementing them. And why is this important? In the developing world, if countries had the capacity to design bankable projects and implement them, they would not be in the circumstances they are. They don't have the capacity either because of people who are trained or different methods that we can help them with. And I think that's another part of what we're trying to do, is to focus our knowledge bank not just on knowledge, but the practical application of that knowledge to enhance the capacity of those who aren't fortunate enough to be in Singapore.
Amazing. And very methodical in how, how these problems are being looked at as a knowledge bank. So the 5 pillars that Ajay mentioned, let me just, now we're running out of time, focus on the last, digital, which is what this community is about. 2 things. In the MAS and in Singapore and this festival, we talk about 2 things: digital inclusion and digital foundational infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Digital inclusion is about making it accessible and so on.
And affordable.
And how does the World Bank look at this? What is, someone was telling me a few days ago, we need to have a bill of digital rights. Yes. Globally, that today to be included in the economy, there are basic digital tools and access, broadband and so on that you need to have. What is your vision on that? What is the World Bank's thinking on how to create a digitally inclusive world? The second is a bit more technical, digital foundational infrastructure. You touched on it a little bit just now. I want to hear a bit more of that, because in this festival, we talk a lot about it. In the Industrial Revolution, we built roads, we built ports, we build physical infrastructure to move goods across. In the digital revolution, you need digital highways, you use that term. What are those highways? What is the bank thinking of investing, lending, financing, and advising on digital infrastructures? What are those digital infrastructures? Is that going to be distributed ledger based? What is a global public utility looking like? We need a global payments utility so that people can send money. And these are migrant workers sending money back to their villages and having to pay 10% or 8%. And this is a problem in your previous incarnation. You know this far better than most of us. So 2 things: digital inclusion, digital foundational infrastructure.
A great question. So I think the bank is doing a lot of work in both, and they were doing it well before I arrived. We're going to create a vertical which brings it together and adds the governance angle, which we can talk about later. But the digital inclusion to me is not just access, but affordability. Yeah. So I think you need broadband. You need it available in various ways to reach the most remote location. But you also need it at a price point that makes it accessible to people, both in terms of the consumption of that broadband spectrum, but also in terms of the devices that they need to use to be able to consume that spectrum in a useful way. So I think the bank is very focused on that access and affordability as a knowledge transfer and financing and the work we're doing in different countries on that space. You heard me talk about Latin America. There we were talking about digital inclusion for girls who had learning gaps because of COVID. But eventually we're going to go from there to a wider scope of digitization across the continent. Same idea. The second part is really interesting. I think digital highways start from the fundamental premise that people have a digital identity. I think if you don't have an identity, which I believe governments should issue. I do not believe the private sector should own an identity. I believe that governments must issue the identity, just as today you issue a passport to a citizen. That physical passport, think of that as the digital equivalent of that, making it available in a simple, accessible way for people to then use it for different things that they want to do is kind of what I'm referring to. But doing it in a way that at the same time provides security to the citizen of that identity and then gives them privacy so that they should not be able to hide from the law, but they should not need the government to know everything about them. And I think threading that needle is one of the hardest things to do. Because a lot of the people, when they discuss identity, they either forget that hiding from the law is an unacceptable social contract, or they think that losing your privacy is an acceptable social contract. I'm really sorry, but both are not acceptable. And not understanding that is what will set back the growth of digitization. The evangelists who argue for one over the other are not helping. We need to get both. Every citizen deserves a digital identity with privacy. And I think that's just important. That's the digital Bill of Rights that I think we should start with. I know you understand this. I'm preaching to the converted. But I think in the world, this conversation gets lost. The second part is once you have that identity and you've already built the access and affordability, if you do it well, then in theory, the private sector can go wild on building the applications on that highway, and they can price the applications for what they think is appropriate. In my old company, in MasterCard, I used to describe this as MasterCard's job is to build the rail for the railroad. Standardized rails, they should work across borders, interoperable, simple systems, not just card rails, by the way. You know that MasterCard is big in real-time payment systems. In fact, the technology is used in Singapore even today for the real-time payment system. And the methodology of building that rail is very important with the rules that apply. But then the private sector should operate the railroad on top. Does their train want to have a first class, second class, third class? Is it air conditioned or not? Do they offer the following kind of food? Is there a bedroll attached or not? You know what? That's not the public sector's purview. It is not the purview of a MasterCard. It is the purview of the private sector, people in this room, banks, fintechs, who build that. And I think getting that clear in the digital highway world is really important. And I think what you do at the FinTech Festival is, Ravi, you're providing a pathway for people to understand this. And for that, I could not thank you enough, because you're creating a transparent discussion. And I believe that all of them believe and agree with that. That's why they come here year after year. But you've been doing this. And I know that you're going to be retiring. And I don't think you can retire without knowing how much we love and appreciate what you did. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
He didn't expect that, right? He thought
I'm
this was
supposed to
him
be asking the
talking to me.
questions. But no, a lot of what Ajay has just said is music to our ears. Interoperability, common public goods, highways, private sector innovation and solutions and applications riding on it. Such a beautiful concept, which many of us in this room get it. We are glad that the president of the World Bank gets it and knows it so well. And we've got good examples. The India Stack is a visionary outcome.
Same idea.
Digital identity at the base. You have the unified payment system because you need a rail to send money across, and you have trusted data. And in Singapore, we have our own version, a digital identity, a payment rail for instantaneous payments, and trusted data that you can draw on, which belongs to you, but resides in different places. Question is, can we build an India Stack in every developed? Leave out the Western countries. They have hang-ups about privacy. But can we build this in Africa, across South Asia and Southeast Asia?
Well, you could, I think, the idea of creating a digital stack that respects the citizen's privacy is eminently doable with the blockchain. You see, people misunderstand what we're talking about on privacy. After all, if you issue my passport and you have my bio details for me to enter into through immigration and leave, you have my personal details with you. I trusted you with that. Like I trusted my bank with my bank opening and the KYC and AML that they do. Or like I trusted my cell phone operator with the data I gave them. People have trust in certain entities. You can build privacy into the system by not enabling any one entity to know everything that Ravi Menon is doing. That's Ravi's right as a citizen. And so I'm a little different on that part, in that I believe that the Western world's hang up on privacy is actually a hang up that we all should have. Because a citizen's right to privacy is your human right. And you do not have a right to do things that hide from the law. That, I'm sorry, is not your human right. But your human right is your right to privacy. And I think that the blockchain is a unique way to enable the issuing of identities by governments, which enable the law to be kept and managed, while enabling no other player to get undue advantage of the knowledge of you as a citizen. And I think that is where the exploration of our innovation must go, because we must give people the convenience and the ease of digital with the privacy they deserve. I'm just going to keep saying that.
Amazing. I don't think we've ever had a World Bank president talk blockchain. Probably never will in future, but this is the kind of vision we need, and you understand why people say they're excited about the new leadership at the bank. All good things must end, so time is coming to a close. You have, I don't know, 3,000 people here, but many more in the FinTech Festival watching this, hearing you, or, it's live streamed and then they'll watch it later. What is your message to them? How can the FinTech community of the world help the World Bank do its job? What would you like to tell them?
I think you have to be a key part of creating accessibility and affordability. Your task is to break through the arbitrage advantage of incumbency and break through in a way that enables access for women and young people and change their lives, because young people and women are our future.
So well put. So we know what's our task, and he's put it even in bolder terms, and I might have hesitated, which is take away the margins and the spreads that the incumbents make things affordable, make things accessible, make things inclusive. And that, I think, is a great opportunity for the FinTech community to do, and working in partnership with the likes of the World Bank, where you have a tech person in charge, and together we can create many of these solutions for the betterment of the world. So a round of applause for Ajay Banga.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And a round of applause for Ravi. Thank you.
Thank you so much.